Well, hello there. What's up, everybody? Welcome into First Take. And Max, let me say, I'm really a creature of habit, but I'm kind of feeling these new digs.
Oh, yeah, nothing wrong with this at all.
Right? I like it. But it is just for a day. Hope you had fun over the weekend. You are across the pond.
Oh,
big fight.
By the way, calling one of the all-time great heavyweight title fights, Anthony Joshua. That's the way you become heavyweight champion of the world. Climbed off the deck to knock out Klitschko.
You thought he'd get the job done. He did. And Stephen A. is in NYC. What's up?
Couple of things. I would like to confess that I am incredibly jealous because that studio is looking mighty fly.
Look like a Christmas tree, Stephen A.
I am jealous. I mean, I got to talk to the bosses about that being our new studio right there. I love our old studio, but Lord, that is fly. And Max Kellerman, you are absolutely right. What a fight. I watched it from start to finish. Great job calling the fight, as you always do, my man. And of course, Molly Wood. It's always lovely.
It's always fun to text Stephen A.
Always lovely seeing
during the when I'm calling a fight, I always get texts from Stephen A. We go back and forth, and when he's doing basketball, NBA, you know, we're always going back and forth on the text.
That's right.
For sure. Speaking of basketball, you guys want to talk a little playoffs? Let's get into it. So the Clippers have never gotten out of the second round, and for the second straight year, they are one and done with a Game 7 at home in LA. They couldn't get the job done, falling to the Jazz. Mike Wilbon, your thoughts?
When we get to the question of do you keep the Clippers together, my answer would be why? Why would you bring this group back? And I know that Mr. Ballmer, the owner, has already hinted at that. I mean, there were people talking to him off the record about that before this game started, and there seems to be some optimism, if you want to use that word, about Chris Paul coming back, Blake Griffin coming back. Each of those guys, by the way, would be signing deals for more than $200 million. And again, the question is why? It doesn't work for this group.
Obviously, Blake Griffin didn't play in the last 4 games. This could be the end of Lob City. Max, where should they go from here?
Well, they need a total reboot. I mean, the whole problem has been Doc Rivers as the GM the entire time. You want to see nepotism gone wrong? Look at the contract that Austin Rivers gave. Now, he improved a lot this season. It's like, oh, look, he's actually an NBA player. But not to the tune of the kind of contract that his dad gave him. And certainly he choked and they didn't show up. Game 7 at home and lost another playoff series. That's the 5th consecutive series now they've lost. When leading in the series, that's an all-time NBA record. There's no way they should keep this group together. It should have a total teardown and reboot. But fortune favors the bold. You know, try to move Chris Paul for Kyrie Irving when you have a shot. You don't do that. Blake Griffin for what you can get when his trade value is optimal. You don't do that. Let's say they don't. Let's say Doc Rivers, Ballmer keeps Rivers in place, the whole thing, and they're only going to make one move. The answer is you trade Blake Griffin and you get Carmelo Anthony for him. Yeah, a more intricate trade would involve Paul George. That's probably a 3-team trade where Blake maybe winds up in OKC, something like that. But the most straightforward thing they can do is sign and trade Blake for Carmelo, put him with Chris Paul. No, you're not getting past the Warriors with that next year. But maybe that's a lure for LeBron James eventually. The LA market with the 2 guys he's always said he wanted to play with before his NBA career is over. And if that can act as a lure for LeBron James, and in the meantime you don't take a step back and maybe you take a little step forward, that's a good thing. So total reboot is needed. But barring that, a Blake for Carmelo deal makes sense for the reason I just said.
Well, the priority for me, Max, should be getting rid of Blake Griffin. That's number one. It's not because he can't play. It's because he can play. Just it doesn't work where he's at, and he needs to go elsewhere, and that's the individual that you could probably get extreme value for because he still has some years left. You're assuming that he's going to be healthier than he's been the last couple of years, and then you want to go in that direction. Contrary to what our colleague Ryan Russillo just said on SportsCenter, I think it is the way to go after Carmelo Anthony because it's not about him being better than Blake or worse. It's about what game he brings to the table. Carmelo Anthony can get his own shot. Carmelo Anthony is primarily a shooter. Carmelo Anthony with Chris Paul would definitely work wonders, not to mention the fact it creates space for DeAndre Jordan to operate, assuming he wants to improve on his offensive game, or he's a strong offensive rebounder and he can make things happen in that regard. More importantly than anything else, what you're really after is this. If you are Doc Rivers If Doc Rivers is hesitant or reluctant in any way to make a move, then you know what? It's time for Doc Rivers to go, at least as the executive. I would say that should be the case now. He should be the coach, but not the executive, because I think Doc Rivers is one of those loyal cats that really is very, very gifted at ingratiating himself on a personal level with his players. The Achilles heel of that, Max, or the downside to that, is that because you cultivate such personal feelings for these guys, I think sometimes it compromises him, even if he doesn't see that, which is why I would say to you, I don't think he belongs in that position as an executive. He needs to have some say, but he doesn't need to be the coach and the boss as an executive. Somebody else needs to have a higher authority as an executive. With all of that being said,
the same thing that makes him a great coach makes him a bad GM. The loyalty to his guys, which is why Ballmer, if he's smart, the reboot starts with bringing in a great GM like Ujiri or even a guy like Hinkie, someone who's going to rebuild it.
Yeah. But the problem with that is, what if that great GM says, you know what, I kind of like Blake Griffin? No, I'm not feeling that. I need to make sure it's somebody that wants Blake Griffin to go because he's looking at the parts that you have available to you. I'm looking at CP3, and I'm looking at it like this. Max, the dude is an elite point guard. He's not the most athletic dude in the world. He should not be your best player. You need to have somebody else who's a primary scorer. CP3's his penchant is to be a facilitator first, not a scorer. You can't ask that of him, particularly in today's game, Max, where you got the Russell Westbrooks, the James Harden, and others playing point guard. No, you need somebody else that can deliver for you and deliver from the perimeter, not trying to do so in the post, driving to the basket like Blake Griffin does.
Bottom line is CP3 is a great player. We all know it, but his playoff record is what it is. You know, that's the one thing he has in common. The one consistent in Chris Paul's failure in the playoffs, coaches, teammates, different towns, franchises, is Chris Paul himself. So who says that he's off limits? That's why I say really what's most important here is a total reboot of the franchise. Chris Paul has trade value in a sign and trade. Blake has trade value. DeAndre has trade value. They're more valuable as the component parts you can get back for them than they are on the floor together. They will never get by Golden State. They couldn't get by Utah. And before everyone blames it on Blake's injury, and I agree, that doesn't help them. Come on, they were in trouble before Blake got hurt in the first round of the playoffs. They are what they are. We've seen their upside. Doc is never going to have a great bench. He's not that kind of GM who can really flesh out an entire team. You mentioned, and I have in the past, his loyalty to his players as coach works against him. So can Doc coach stay? If you don't do a total reboot, sure, he's a great coach. Doc GM has to go. And in fact, if I had my druthers, if I were Steve Ballmer, I would totally clean house. New GM, let him get as much value as possible for all the parts you have on this team,
you keep talking. You're not answering my question. You say total reboot. I understand a reboot total. Yep. I mean, you act like you could just walk outside and find another point guard like Chris Paul. I could find a Blake Griffin before I could find a Chris Paul. And not only that, yes.
Where does Chris Paul rank among point guards, even in the Western Conference? Is Chris Paul better than John Wall?
I thought you knew your basketball. It takes a point guard to run a team. Are you trying to tell me you could just go out there and find anybody to run a team?
But you're not ready. You're not knocking on the door ready to win a championship.
No, I'm assuming you're going to get something for Blake, Max. I'm assuming you're going to get something for Blake.
And then it's still Chris Paul on the team who's been unable to advance in the playoffs.
Hold on, let's go back to that. Chris Paul was in New Orleans before he arrived in Los Angeles, right? Who was in the Western Conference? You had Tim Duncan with Ginobili and Park and those boys.
You
had Shaq and Kobe. You know what I'm saying? You had Shaq and Kobe, and he was in New Orleans with David West.
You're in the Western Conference. This happens in every era. Oh, so-and-so was in the same conference, or else otherwise, then they would. Yeah, but if you're Chris Paul and you're crewed up, then the other team should be looking at you saying you're in the Western Conference.
So in other words, you've just forgotten what you know about basketball. If Chris Paul were Allen Iverson, somebody who had the ball in his hands with the primary responsibility of being a scorer, you make sense to me. But if you know that he's a quintessential point guard, that he's an orchestrator who runs the show, Chris Paul averaged 27 and 9.
Hold on. Time out.
What are you talking about?
Can Blake score? He averages better than 20 every season. Sometimes in the mid-20s. Can J.J. Redick shoot? Can DeAndre Jordan grab rebounds for you and clean up around the basket?
Do I get to answer those questions? I just want to know. Because you're asking direct questions. I really want to answer them. Blake Griffin is 6'10", bro. Nah. The fact of the matter, wait a minute, 6'9", that's fair, because without his shoes, 6'9", that's fair. I give that to you. But the point that I'm trying to make to you is this. If you are a guy that's a 6-foot point guard and you are a floor general and a facilitator, that is an entirely different responsibility than somebody who's a scorer. I'm saying you got to know that.
Can Blake
and if you look at Blake Griffin,
my point
not in big moments. Not in big moments.
He's got
not in big moments.
J.J. Redick can shoot the lights out. Blake Griffin is a
How many years did you work in LA?
Option. How many weapons exactly does he need?
5.
How many years did you do radio in LA?
5.5 years.
In that 5.5 years, can you give me one moment that Blake Griffin made big shots? One. Take your time, I'll wait.
You want a big shot? Hold on.
Take your time.
Did Jamal Crawford make big shots? He even had a six-man who could come off the bench and dominate in the fourth quarter.
All right, patience, Stephen A. We got to move on.
When has Blake done it?
Why are you focusing on Blake? Blake is one of the many weapons that Chris Paul has had available to him during his time in LA.
I've been focused on Blake since day one because I know basketball and I know what he's supposed to be doing. I'm not talking about what he has or hasn't done. I know what he's supposed to be doing.
Because he's
I know what his job description is.
Like Isaiah is short. He's not getting a pass. No one gets a pass because they're short. You got to play.
Okay. Let's wrap it up. We'll revisit it a little later in the show. Clearly, they had those flatbeds on the plane because you are well rested. We want to know what you think at home. Weigh in on the Clippers conversation, their disappointment. Does CP3 deserve a pass for LA's first-round exit? Go on Twitter and vote. Those results coming a little later. Stephen A. will have his final take on CP3 and what he should do and so much more. So stay tuned for that at the end of the show.